My name is Tony Clark, and like many of us here, if not all of us here, we all have our memories and our stories about you. And just as Grand Chief Jerry Antoine shared with us his memories, my memories actually go back a little longer than the last few months or the last couple of years. They go back some 35 years. And it was at that time that Hugh and Carmel were both the first coordinators of something called Project North. And it was an occasion where the churches were actually getting themselves together to start to act in solidarity with the First Nations, with the Aboriginal peoples of the North. And it was the vision of Hugh and Carmel, along with the rest of us on the team, that really had a chance to see what an extraordinary moment of history we were a part of. And so those memories are there for me in many ways. But about 15 months ago, Hugh was in our living room in Ottawa, and we were swapping stories from the past. A lot of stories were put on the table. But a couple of them that quickly come to mind were, for example, the time that Hugh and I, George Rasmus, and a few other people were flying from Winnipeg to Edmonton. And we were talking about the issues and what was happening with Mackenzie Valley Pipeline and the Berger Commission hearings and everything else. And it was a great moment of discussion and debate, but we were sitting in different seats, and so we had to talk across each other. By the time we got to Edmonton, there were at least 15 other people who were passengers that were engaged in the conversation, including one flight attendant. And there was another story that really deals with family life in many ways. One point, Carmel and Hugh and their son Matthew came to a place where we were at a cottage in Muskoka, just chilling out and having a good time. And my two children, Tanya and Christopher, about 7 and 8 and 9-year-olds, I guess at that time, and Matthew around the same age, around 9 and 10 years at the same time, decided that Hugh was too big to sit in a canoe by himself, and therefore he needed to be tipped and dumped. And each one of them took their turns at tipping and dunking him into the water. To this very day, as of a few days ago, both my children remember that very clearly as an important moment in their lives. And then there was the time when he got me out of some trouble. It was, we were arriving in the north, in one of the northern BC towns, and I should say I was arriving by plane, and he and Russ Hatton were on the tarmac waiting for me to land and come off the plane and so forth. And I came off the plane and I put my fist up like this, you know. Those days it was like the black power signal, you know, but I put my fist up like this. And the RCMP quickly pulled me aside. Well, I didn't know what this was all about and why, and of course I was arguing with the RCMP, and Hugh came up and quietly, gradually, in a most uncharacteristically diplomatic way, got me out of trouble. But you know, when I think of Hugh McCullum, I'm trying to find out who this incredible, extraordinary, larger-than-life person really was. In my reflections over the last number of days since I last talked to him, which was a few days ago, 2 days before he died, I was wondering just who is this person? What image do I have of him? And the image, when I closed my eyes, that kept coming back over and over again was that this was a true warrior. Hugh was really a warrior. He wasn't a warrior in the conventional sense that we know of people going off to war today in Iraq or in Afghanistan or anything like that. And certainly not a warrior in the Rambo sense, although sometimes I wonder. But really, he was a warrior for justice, for human rights, and in the last few years of his life, I believe, for ecological sustainability. He really was a warrior. And as a warrior, he fought with words. He was a great communicator, as we all know, as Jerry was mentioning a few moments ago. His writing, his speaking, that's how he fought the battles. And that's how he took the battles to task and dealt with the issues at hand. He always was there to help people tell their own stories, either by helping them write those stories or by actually writing them for them. He was there to help communicate. But secondly, he also had a capacity to listen, particularly to the victims. I don't say he listened well all the time, but he certainly listened to those that were in pain and suffering, and he understood that, and he found a way through his empathy to identify with those people. And that was an extraordinary gift, and one that carried him right through his life. And I remember very clearly the North-South consultations that we had in Project North that were set up. And this was, remember, this was before the residential school crisis and scandal. And those were the days, I shouldn't say before the residential school crisis, but before the scandal became a scandal. And that was because in those North-South consultations, we would bring together the leadership and the grassroots movements of the North in dialogue with the church leaders and other activists engaged in this work in the churches. And these North-South consultations, while they were an exchange of information and so forth, they were above all something that went to the heart of a relationship. And that heart of that relationship sometimes was very painful and disturbed because of the past history. And yet, Hugh and the rest of us kept working at making those consultations work. And they were incredible moments in terms of listening. Amen. There was also the moment of courage, and also in terms of being a warrior, being courageous in the face of danger itself. And there were many, perhaps, examples that all of us can cite about when Hugh was fairly courageous in the face of some dangerous situations. But I remember one situation in particular that comes to mind. We were in Inuvik at the time, and in the heat of the Mackenzie Valley Pipeline, with forces on both sides and the tension really building, one had to watch out and be pretty careful in certain circumstances. And at one time we were to be picked up, to be taken from one place to another to meet with some people, but instead of going from point A to point B, we took a number of detours and changed vans a couple of times. And I remember being with you very much with you at the time, and I remember looking at him, and there was no words expressed between us. We just looked at each other, and we knew that we had been through this before somewhere else. And it was particularly in the case of certain situations in Central America, if you were going to meet somebody, you had to move from place to place, change vans, and go on and change vans again in order to not be detected and not be stopped and not be hit by forces, by the paramilitary forces. And the same kind of feeling existed with us in Inuvik at that time. Those dangers were there, and he met it, and he faced them. He also was strong and very clear about speaking the truth to those in power.